So we took a trip around Los Angeles to bring you what it looks like in the second largest city in America.
Living on the other side of the world, for us, is like a dream coming here, you know?
Los Angeles hasn't been the most welcoming city in the last year, whether it had to do with the fires, some of the political unrest.
It was supposed to be the most glamorous street in the world. Instead, it just ranked dead last. Out of 101 major tourist attractions on the entire planet, Hollywood Boulevard finished last. Not second to last, last. So what on earth happened to one of the most famous streets in human history? There's a version of Hollywood Boulevard that exists in the imagination of millions of people around the world. A sun-drenched stretch of American promise, gleaming stars pressed into the sidewalk, movie palaces rising on either side, the air thick with possibility, and the electric sense that history is always just a breath away. That version of Hollywood Boulevard is real. It just stopped being real about 80 years ago. And the gap between what people expect to find and what they actually find, that gap has become the defining story of one of America's most iconic streets. So today we're going to trace exactly how this happened, from the golden age to the slow unraveling, from the glamour that made Hollywood synonymous with the American dream, to the moment it officially became the worst-ranked major tourist attraction on the planet. If you're new here, this channel covers stories like this one: urban history, cultural decline, the rise and fall of great American places. Hit subscribe. You won't regret it. To understand why all of this stings, you have to understand what Hollywood Boulevard once represented. The boulevard's commercial core began taking real shape in the early 1920s, when developers poured money into the area and the film industry planted its roots nearby. What followed was one of the most concentrated bursts of architectural ambition in American urban history. The vast majority of the boulevard's defining buildings were constructed between 1915 and 1939. Walking that street during the Golden Era meant moving through a corridor of movie palaces, supper clubs, radio studios, ornate architecture that announced, without any subtlety, that something important was happening here. In 1919, Musso and Frank Grill opened its doors. It's still open today, the oldest restaurant in Hollywood. In 1922, Sid Grauman opened the Egyptian Theater, which hosted the very first Hollywood movie premiere. 5 years later came the crown jewel, the TCL Chinese Theater, then known as Grauman's Chinese Theater, premiered Cecil B. DeMille's The King of Kings on May 18, 1927. Grauman built the place for around $2 million, roughly $30 million in today's money, importing authentic Chinese-inspired architecture and artifacts, and creating a forecourt that would eventually bear the handprints and footprints of nearly 200 film legends.
Is down this summer here in Los Angeles. The city has seen significant drops in international visitors, and there are a number of reasons why we're no longer a favorite attraction.
Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford were the first. On April 30th, 1927, Humphrey Bogart, Cary Grant, Frank Sinatra, and Marilyn Monroe followed over the years. The Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel opened that same year. Its Blossom Room hosted the very first Academy Awards ceremony in 1929. This neighborhood hummed. It was alive with ambition, spectacle, and genuine cultural weight. The Walk of Fame, that 1.3-mile stretch of coral pink terrazzo stars rimmed in brass, was first installed in 1960 and 1961, with an initial 1,558 stars. Today, more than 2,800 stars line the pavement. It was conceived partly to encourage redevelopment of an area that was already beginning to slip. And that detail is worth pausing on, because the story of Hollywood Boulevard's decline didn't begin in the 2000s. The warning signs were visible before the walk ever hit the pavement. Here's the part people tend to forget. Hollywood Boulevard had its first serious decline in the 1960s and 1970s. After the Walk of Fame's initial installation, 8 years passed without a new star being added. The neighborhood fell into what historians bluntly call protracted urban decay. Live television tapings dwindled. Studios began consolidating and relocating their day-to-day operations. The glamour didn't disappear overnight. It quietly packed up and moved to other parts of Los Angeles. By the mid-1970s, Hollywood Boulevard had earned a grim reputation. seedy, neglected, a street haunted by the ghost of what it used to be. Prostitution and petty crime had taken hold of a corridor that a generation earlier had been one of the most celebrated in America. The 1980s brought some recovery. Johnny Grant, a Chamber of Commerce figure credited with revitalizing the Walk of Fame, had since 1968 required each honoree to personally attend their star unveiling, transforming the walk from a passive landmark into a recurring media event. By the late 1980s and into the 1990s, Hollywood was attracting tourists again. New businesses were opening. There was genuine optimism. Then came the 1994 Northridge earthquake, which damaged numerous buildings along the boulevard. Rebuilding took years, and while the physical structures were eventually restored, the disruption didn't help an area that was still fragile. Throughout the 1990s and into the early 2000s, Hollywood Boulevard straddled an uncomfortable line, never quite dirty enough to be abandoned, never quite polished enough to deliver on its promise. At some point, the gap between what visitors expected and what they actually found became the entire story. The image that exists in the global imagination, the one exported through decades of film and television, is of a sun-drenched boulevard populated by movie stars, luxury, and the pulse of American celebrity. That image is roughly a century out of date. TripAdvisor rates the Walk of Fame 3.4 out of 5 stars and places it at number 64 on its Los Angeles to-do list, behind dozens of other attractions. The reviews are not subtle. One visitor wrote, "The area is run down, dirty, and full of shady figures. Celebrities are hardly met here, but there are plenty of homeless people. We walked down the street once and then moved on quickly." Another noted, "The image you have of the Hollywood Walk of Fame is one of stardom and glitz. But the reality is your average city center with expensive gift shops." That second quote has become something of an unofficial tagline for the boulevard's current state. Then, in late 2025, the luggage storage company Stasher released a study ranking more than 100 major tourist attractions worldwide. The methodology included Google review scores, TikTok engagement, airport accessibility, country safety ratings, and local accommodation quality. The Hollywood Walk of Fame came in dead last, officially branded the worst major tourist attraction on the planet. It ranked lowest on Google ratings and safety metrics among all 101 attractions studied. It also lost points for sitting approximately 23 miles from Los Angeles International Airport, a distance that sounds manageable until you factor in Los Angeles traffic, which until 2025 had been ranked the worst commute in the United States for years. What makes this particularly striking is that the walk's lowest Google score in the study was still a 4 out of 5. The problem wasn't that people gave it terrible reviews. The problem was that 100 other major attractions around the world simply ranked higher across every metric that matters. In a global competition for tourist attention, Hollywood Boulevard is currently losing to almost everyone. If this story is landing with you, go ahead and hit the like button. It helps this channel more than you know. No honest account of Hollywood Boulevard today is complete without addressing the costume characters. For years, the Spider-Mans, Batmans, Captain Americas, and Mickey Mouses stationed along the walk were a genuine part of the boulevard's street culture. Some were aspiring performers earning a living between auditions. For many visitors, especially families with young children, they were memorable and fun. But over time, the dynamic shifted. Aggressive tip solicitation became common. Tourists reported being grabbed, followed, pressured. In some cases, visitors who didn't pay after a photo was taken, sometimes a photo they hadn't asked for, found themselves in uncomfortable confrontations. The Los Angeles City Council addressed this directly in 2016, voting to establish a permitting system that would allow up to 20 performers per day to operate along the boulevard between Highland Avenue and Orange Drive. Performers who blocked pedestrian traffic could lose permit access for 3 months. The move came after years of complaints, and after New York's Times Square had already restricted its costume characters to designated painted zones, with fines of up to $500 for those caught operating outside them. The permitting system helped, but it didn't fully resolve the tension, because the core problem isn't administrative. When a tourist steps over a homeless encampment to reach a performer who immediately demands money after an uninvited photo, the entire experience collapses into something that feels less like a visit to a legendary landmark and more like running a gauntlet. Tony Hoover, who owns Redline Tours, a company offering historical walking tours of Hollywood's movie palaces, has described the impact on his business directly. Walk-in traffic, the kind that arrives spontaneously, had probably dropped by close to 50% as the neighborhood's reputation worsened. People want to see the Walk of Stars, he said. They don't want to be stepping over people who are panhandling, asking for money, sleeping on the sidewalk. It's impossible to talk about the state of Hollywood Boulevard without talking about homelessness. And it's impossible to do that without acknowledging that the crisis is severe, long-standing, and not easily resolved. Los Angeles County has one of the largest unhoused populations in the United States. Despite billions of dollars committed to the problem, former Governor Gavin Newsom's administration directed more than $17 billion toward addressing homelessness over 4 years. The street-level reality in Hollywood has remained consistently grim. Along the Walk of Fame, tourists and vendors alike have described scenes that would not appear in any tourism brochure. People sleeping on the embedded stars, people sleeping on benches, in shop doorways. Encampments close enough that families with young children must navigate through them to reach the attractions they travel to see. Reviewers mention the smell on certain stretches of the boulevard with a consistency that is impossible to ignore. One TripAdvisor reviewer described arriving early in the morning to photograph the stars before crowds gathered, and finding people sleeping everywhere. I went early to try to see more stars and take pics, they wrote, and regretted it. Local residents speaking to media have described conditions beyond the tourist experience. People in distress, visible suffering in plain view, despite regular complaints to city services. The challenge here is that homelessness isn't a problem unique to this neighborhood, nor one that a business improvement district or a fresh coat of paint can solve. It's a systemic issue rooted in housing costs, mental health services, addiction, and policy. But for a destination that markets itself on glamour and legacy, the visible human cost of that broader failure lands with particular force. Here's a dimension that often gets overlooked. The film and television industry, the reason Hollywood Boulevard became famous in the first place, has by almost every measurable metric left Los Angeles. And it didn't happen suddenly. The turning point arrived in 2008, when Georgia passed a law offering a combined 30% tax credit on film and television productions, with no cap on total credits and no sunset clause. The film industry spent $93 million on Georgia productions in 2007. By 2016, that figure had ballooned to $2 billion. Productions that once would have been shot on Los Angeles lots began routing through Atlanta. Trilith Studios, just outside Metro Atlanta, became one of the busiest production facilities in the country. Marvel alone made nearly 24 superhero movies and television shows in the Atlanta area. Then the migration continued beyond Georgia. The United Kingdom, offering a 25.5% tax rebate on qualifying expenditures, with additional incentives for animation and independent films, began pulling productions across the Atlantic. By 2025, Marvel was shifting much of its upcoming content to the UK. DC Studios announced that its next 2 films, Supergirl and Clayface, would both film there. According to Film LA, on-location production in Greater Los Angeles declined more than 22% in the first quarter of 2025, alone compared to the prior year. Soundstage occupancy in Los Angeles, which typically stays above 90%, dropped to 63% in 2024. Canada, remarkably, eclipsed California as the top location for feature films in both 2023 and 2024. The streaming revolution compounded everything. A showrunner in 2025 can write scripts in Austin, shoot in Budapest, post-produce in London, and release globally through a streaming platform, without ever setting foot on a soundstage in Burbank. The pandemic proved that remote collaboration in the industry was more viable than anyone had admitted. The 2023 writers and actors strikes accelerated the shift, pushing significant production abroad, and not all of it came back. What this means for Hollywood Boulevard, a street whose entire identity was built on proximity to the industry, is that the foundation of its appeal has shifted underneath it. The cumulative weight of all these pressures was already visible before 2020, but the pandemic accelerated everything, and the years since have brought compounding crises. International tourism to California fell by nearly 9% in February 2025 compared to the same month in 2024, according to Visit California. In the 3 months through August 2025, international arrivals fell by 8%, more than 170,000 fewer global visitors than the prior year. Overseas visitors to the United States, excluding Canada and Mexico, were down 12%. In March 2025 year-over-year, according to the International Trade Administration. The January 2025 Eaton and Palisades fires generated images of Los Angeles in flames that circulated globally, damaging the city's reputation as a destination. Immigration enforcement actions created uncertainty among international visitors. Tariff tensions and geopolitical friction kept Canadians, historically California's largest international market, away in significant numbers. Canadian arrivals to California fell nearly 38% by August 2025 compared to the prior year. Along Hollywood Boulevard, the numbers told a brutal story. Michael Logan of Open Bus Tours reported business down somewhere between 70 and 80%. Young Lee, owner of the Hollywood 21 market near Hollywood and Highland, said visitor numbers had dropped 50%. Salim Osman of Ride Like a Star said foot traffic fell by nearly 50% over the summer. It used to be shoulder to shoulder out here, he said. It's a lot harder for people to come here, or they're afraid of what's going on, so they just don't come. Victor Franco, another vendor, put it plainly. Before, during spring break, you couldn't even walk through here. Now it's definitely slowed down a lot. Marty Minogue, an employee at One World Tours, delivered one of the starker assessments. My boss has been out here 26 years. He says it's the slowest he's ever seen. The Hollywood Partnership reported that visitor numbers had dropped by roughly half over the prior year. Walk-in traffic, the kind that once sustained dozens of businesses along the boulevard, had dried up in ways that vendors described as unlike anything they had experienced before. To be fair, and fairness is worth maintaining here, the situation isn't being entirely ignored. In March 2024, the Los Angeles City Council announced the Access to Hollywood Street Improvement Project, a plan to redesign a 3.6-mile stretch of Hollywood Boulevard. The project includes removing car lanes to install protected bike lanes and dedicated bus lanes, improved crosswalks, and widened sidewalks. The city also approved $1 million to fund additional public restrooms and a visitor information center. Governor Newsom proposed expanding California's annual film tax credit from $330 million to $750 million, more than doubling the existing investment, to draw productions back. Mayor Karen Bass issued executive directives aimed at making filming in Los Angeles easier and more affordable. Groups like the Motion Picture Association have called for a national approach, asking the federal government to offer tax incentives to help bring production back to American soil. These are real efforts. But the honest assessment is that bike lanes and wider sidewalks will not, on their own, meaningfully reverse the boulevard's structural decline. And tax credit proposals, however ambitious, are fighting against decades of institutional momentum pointing in the other direction. Some of Hollywood's physical anchors remain genuinely worth visiting. The TCL Chinese Theater was renovated in 2013 into a custom IMAX facility, seating 932 people with one of the largest screens in North America. The Dolby Theater draws crowds around Oscar season. The Egyptian Theater operates as a functioning cinema and cultural venue. Musso and Frank Grill has been continuously open since 1919. These are real things. They matter. Hollywood Boulevard still has bones worth preserving. But bones alone are not a destination. The honest answer is, maybe. But not easily, and not without confronting the real problems rather than the cosmetic ones. Hollywood Boulevard still has genuine history embedded in every block. The architecture, the theaters, the walk itself. They represent a cultural legacy most streets in the world would envy. The TCL Chinese Theater alone holds more film history in its forecourt than most museums hold in their entire collections. But history alone doesn't sustain a destination. What makes a place worth visiting is a combination of experience, safety, accessibility, and the feeling that the place itself respects the people who made the effort to come. Right now, Hollywood Boulevard is struggling on most of those counts simultaneously. The film industry's move away from Los Angeles isn't reversing quickly. The homelessness crisis has no obvious near-term solution. International tourism is down. And while some of the forces driving that decline, geopolitical tension, immigration policy, global perception of the United States, are beyond the Boulevard's control, they are very real. What might be within the Boulevard's control is a genuine, sustained commitment to something its better advocates have always argued for, treating the area not as a tourist trap to be monetized, but as a cultural heritage site to be genuinely maintained and respected. That means real investment in safety and cleanliness. It means honestly closing the gap between the brand and the reality, rather than announcing plans and then letting them stall. And the film industry itself needs to reckon with what happens when productions leave Los Angeles. They take more than jobs and spending. They take the living connection between Hollywood as a place and Hollywood as an idea. That connection is already frayed. The prior year. Because at some point, Hollywood becomes just a brand name for a global industry. And the boulevard that shares that name becomes a faded souvenir of something that happened elsewhere. A landmark that consistently ranks as the world's worst major tourist attraction is not coasting on fumes. It's running on empty. Hollywood Boulevard deserves better. And so do the millions of people who still make the trip to stand on those stars, looking down at the names of people who built something remarkable, and trying to feel some connection to it. The magic was real once. Whether it can be again is entirely up to the city that allowed it to disappear. Drop a comment below. Have you visited Hollywood Boulevard? Did it live up to the dream, or was the reality a shock? I'd genuinely love to hear your experience. And if this video gave you something to think about, hit the like button before you go. It genuinely helps this channel keep covering stories like this one. Hollywood Boulevard deserves better, so do the people who still believe in it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.